All right, so, it's fascinating, right? When you think American Revolution, everyone always pictures those big battles up north, the ones everybody knows about. But the revolution was so much bigger than that, so much more complicated. It was happening all over. And today, we're going deep, deep into one of those moments you don't always hear about.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Siege of Savage's Old Fields,
Mm-hmm.
or another name for it, the First Siege of 96. This was November 1775. And get this, right here in South Carolina. Now, this wasn't just some little skirmish. It was a major deal, one of the very first big armed conflicts in the whole state, really an early warning sign of what was coming.
Yeah, and for you listeners out there who love digging into those hidden corners of history, this deep dive is going to really break it down. We'll get into the whole context of this first clash between the Patriots, the folks who wanted independence, and the Loyalists who were sticking with the crown, all right here in the South. We've got some great historical accounts we're going to be drawing on, tons of detail. We'll look at things like troop strengths, the political climate, the whole 9 yards.
Hold on.
Our goal here is to really pull out the key takeaways and make sure you come away with a clear understanding of this turning point.
Okay, so let's set the stage. What was this situation like with loyalties in South Carolina right at the start of all this? I mean, it wasn't just a simple Patriots versus Loyalists situation, was it? It sounds like things were a lot messier.
Oh, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. The sources really make it clear. Allegiances were all over the place. A lot of the English residents who lived along the coast, those folks were either kind of neutral or even leaned towards rebellion. But then when you go further inland into the backcountry, whoa, completely different story.
Really?
Yeah, you had huge communities there, tons of German and Scottish immigrants, and a lot of them were actually totally against the Patriots' cause.
Wow, so real mix.
Absolutely. And one of the guys who really gets a lot of attention as a leader of that loyalist sentiment out in the backcountry, a guy named Thomas Fletchall. This guy was a real rallying point for the folks opposed to the Patriots.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
And it wasn't just people politely disagreeing in drawing rooms, things were getting heated.
Right.
Oh, yeah, we're talking incidents, tarring and feathering, that kind of thing. And both sides were going after any weapons or ammunition they could get their hands on, like a real struggle over those resources.
So the Patriots weren't just sitting back, right? I mean, they were trying to drum up support in the backcountry, too. That's where William Henry Drayton and Reverend William Tennant enter the picture.
Right.
Trying to get folks on their side. That was their whole mission to 96, wasn't it?
Exactly. And Drayton, he was quite a character. Actually managed to hammer out what the sources describe as a tenuous truce with Fletchall. September 1775. Yeah, but it was super fragile, and while they were trying to, calm things down a little, things elsewhere were getting even more intense.
Yeah, like when the Patriots decided to take Fort Johnson in Charleston Harbor, that must have thrown a wrench in everything.
Talk about a power move.
Yeah.
And with the governor out of the picture, basically, the Patriot Council of Safety, that was the provisional Patriot government, they stepped right in and took over the capital. They started beefing up Charleston's defenses, and that led to a whole other thing.
What's that?
There was an actual exchange of cannon fire with the Royal Navy in November. Yeah, no casualties, luckily, but still a pretty clear sign that things were going way beyond just political maneuvering.
Yeah, no kidding. So the thing that really kicks off the whole showdown at Savage's Old Fields, the real spark that lights the fuse, was the Loyalists grabbing that shipment of gunpowder and ammo.
Right.
I mean, that was supposed to go to the Cherokee, but the Loyalists swooped in and took it in October.
Yeah.
That must have been seen as a huge provocation.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely a direct challenge. The Council of Safety, they decided they had to do something. They weren't going to just sit back. So they organized this big expedition to go get those supplies back, show who's boss. And they picked Colonel Richard Richardson to lead the charge, told him to round up those Loyalist leaders while he was at it.
Gotcha. So while Richardson's getting his forces together, another Patriot leader, Major Andrew Williamson, he's already in the backcountry recruiting. And he hears about this gunpowder heist.
Oh.
And he doesn't wait around.
No way. Williamson was a man of action. He shows up at 96, fast, November 19th, with 560 guys. But here's the thing. 96 itself, not exactly Fort Knox. So Williamson, smart guy, he decides to set up camp on John Savage's plantation. Why? Perfect spot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Gave them a great field of fire for their 3 swivel guns. There's even a map in one of the sources that shows you exactly how it all laid out.
And that's when the Loyalists roll up in force, right? Like way more guys than Williamson had.
Yeah. Patrick Cunningham and Major Joseph Robinson, they were leading the Loyalists. probably around 1,900 men, something like that. So the Patriots, outmanned, they decided wisely not to risk a full-on battle. They hunkered down.
Smart move. So there they are, staring each other down. And at first they try to talk it out, right?
Yep.
But it all falls apart pretty quickly.
Yeah. The negotiations went south when the Loyalists captured 2 Patriot militia guys who were outside the stockade. That started a whole firefight, went on for about 2 hours, and then, the next day, more firing, though mostly from a distance.
I read that the Loyalists tried some creative tactics. Things didn't quite pan out, like that smoke screen thing, remember that?
Oh yeah, that didn't go so well. They were trying to start fires and use the smoke to cover their advance on the stockade, but the ground was damp, so no dice.
Uh-huh. Bummer.
And then they built this massive wooden shield, like a giant portable wall, so they could get close enough to use firebombs. But get this, they accidentally set their own contraption on fire.
Oh, no.
Right. Backfired big time.
So they're going back and forth like this for a few days, and finally the Patriots decide, okay, we're breaking out tonight under cover of darkness. And they're all set, November 21st, getting ready to make their move. But then, just as the sun's setting, something totally unexpected happens.
Yeah. Out of nowhere comes a Loyalist, walking towards the Patriot lines with a white flag. They talked a bit, but nothing really got settled, just agreed to meet again the next morning. And that's when they actually worked out a truce.
A truce, huh? But that involves some pretty big concessions, if I remember right. The Loyalists agreed to pull back across the Saluda River, and the Patriots agreed to tear down their fort.
That's it. Plus, they agreed to exchange all the prisoners that had been taken since November 2nd and promised to stay out of each other's way when it came to communicating with their leaders back home. And one more thing, this is interesting. The Patriots had to give up their swivel guns as part of the deal.
Really?
Yeah, but they got them back a few days later. Don't ask me why.
Weird. It all sounds kind of, I don't know, inconclusive. A whole siege ends with a truce, and everyone just goes their separate ways.
You know, that's actually super insightful. I mean, think about it. This was still really early in the war. Neither side was all in yet, They weren't going for the jugular. And the casualties were pretty light, all things considered. 1 Patriot killed, 12 wounded. Loyalists, 4 killed, 20 wounded.
Interesting. So why would the Loyalists agree to a truce if they seem to have the upper hand?
Well, according to the sources, there might have been some reasons. Governor Campbell himself said the Loyalists weren't exactly the most unified bunch. Leadership issues. And there's this historian, Martin Cann, who thinks the news that Colonel Richardson was on his way with a much bigger Patriot force, like over 4,000 men by then, probably made the Loyalists rethink things. So maybe they were worried about getting outnumbered. Maybe they just weren't that well organized. Who knows? It's one of those mysteries.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So the siege itself might have been a bit of a draw, but what happened afterwards had a much bigger impact, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, no question. When Richardson and his guys arrived, it was pretty much game over for the Loyalist leaders in that area. Most of them were arrested or had to run for it. But even Richardson's campaign wasn't all smooth sailing. You're not going to believe this, but a huge snowstorm hit in late December.
Yeah.
15 inches of snow. Richardson's guys weren't prepared for that, and the retreat back to the lowlands was brutal. That's what ended the campaign, actually. December 22nd, Mother Nature stepped in.
Wow. So even the weather played a role.
It sure did. And some of those Loyalist leaders who got away, they didn't just disappear. Some of them ended up joining British forces in other places. Thomas Brown, for example, went to West Florida and joined up with the British regulars and irregulars. That's one of the reasons the sources say why big organized Loyalist activity in the southern Appalachians fizzled out, though unfortunately things did get even more brutal and nasty in those parts as the war went on.
Right. And 96 itself, well, it wasn't done with conflict just yet. It actually became a British outpost later on and was besieged again.
Exactly. After Charleston fell to the British in 1780, 96 became a really important base for them out in the backcountry. And then, in 1781, Nathaniel Greene, she tried to take it back, besieged it for a while, but had to back off when British reinforcements showed up. But get this, the British actually abandoned 96 not long after that. So this little backcountry settlement, it was actually right in the thick of things for a good chunk of the war.
So even though it might not be as famous as some of the battles up north, the Siege of Savage's Old Fields was a big deal.
Yeah.
A turning point, really. It wasn't a clear-cut victory for either side, but it showed how divided South Carolina was.
100%. The very first major armed conflict in the state, and it made it crystal clear that the revolution in the South wasn't going to be some kind of unified march to freedom. It was going to be messy, complicated, and, Brutal. This siege really set the stage for the kind of bitter partisan fighting that became the hallmark of the war in the South.
And for those of you listening, I hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for just how complex the American Revolution was, right from the very start. The Siege of Savage's Old Fields is a perfect example of that. It shows us that this war wasn't just about those big iconic battles they show you in the history books. It was about people and communities all over the colonies wrestling with their loyalties, fighting for what they believed in, sometimes right in their own backyards.
And that brings up a really interesting question for you to think about. How did those smaller scale conflicts, those local clashes, those moments like the Siege of Savage's Old Fields, how did they shape the course of the American Revolution? How did they impact the way communities saw themselves, the way they interacted with each other? And are there other early events, things we don't always hear about, that might give us even more clues about the real story of the Revolution? That's something to ponder.
Definitely something to chew on.